pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Eric, many people in Poland know Inc. magazine, as Bartosz mentioned, and Fast Money, Fast Company. And please tell us about yourself more, because not really everyone knows the person who is standing behind this great success of these titles. So tell us your story, how you started, because what I know, you didn't start as a journalist.
Yes, you've dug into my shady past and uncovered that I started in show business as an actor. I came to New York to make my fortune as an actor. That dream ended the way most such dreams do, with my deciding I needed to get another career. I wanted to have a family, and the gypsy life of being an actor wasn't going to cut it for that. I did, however, develop a little knowledge about the importance of building a business niche as an actor, for reasons that probably had to do more with my physical appearance than anything else. I developed a specialty for playing emotionally disturbed Cockney teenagers from London. If that's the role that you wanted to fill, I was your guy. Like high specialty, kind of low demand. And eventually I landed a job as a fact checker, the very bottom of the masthead at Money Magazine. And over the years rose to become the editor-in-chief of that magazine, as you said.
What was the path? When was the moment you realized that this acting career is not gonna work, and I prefer to listen to the people and listen to their stories instead of saying my own stories?
I mentioned that specialty that I had, and there was one role, and I told myself, if I don't get cast in this role as a emotionally disturbed punk from London, then I'm giving it all up. And I didn't get it, fortunately, as things turned out. And so I moved on. People always told me that I could write, so I went back to school, and then got on the publishing bandwagon, and the rest is history.
As you look at your career right now, did that small period of being an actor helped you later on? Because in some stage of life, you just realize you are a leader, and you have to talk to the people, and communication is so important then, to clearly communicate what the idea is.
I think that's right, and it would be unfair to think that I spent 6 years at that those years in my 20s were wasted. I do believe I learned something about presentation and something about focus to get over the butterflies in your stomach before you go out on stage, and all of those things. And there was another sort of personal benefit that came to me from those years, is that's where I met my wife. And so you can say I didn't leave show business empty-handed. I left with a spouse.
So when you landed as a journalist, what was your way? Because I assume that there was a fast pace. You became a very fast editor. It's sometimes, I know many journalists, and I'm also a journalist. I know many journalists, they prefer sometimes to stay as a journalist, not become an editor. What was your experience in that?
I thought that as an editor, I could affect more about the course of the publications that I was working for. So I really appreciate the craftsmanship of being a writer and a reporter. But as a manager, I was able to affect the direction of all of the people who worked for me. Entrepreneurs, I think, are very much the same way. You can be an excellent, whatever it is, salesperson, coder, or something like that. But the way you have an impact is by motivating a whole team to achieve a particular end. And that's the reality of founding a company is that you can't do it by yourself, but you can have a much greater effect if you marshal other people towards a particular goal.
So what kind of impact you wanted to achieve as a journalist? What was your mission?
My mission was always to serve the readers and help them succeed at whatever it was that brought them to my publication. So at Money Magazine, my goal was to help people become more secure in their finances and to achieve happiness and not have to worry about money. At Inc., it was very clearly to help entrepreneurs succeed. And at Fast Company, the mission is to help progressive business leaders imagine the future of business, a future that is creative, innovative, socially just, and colored by beautiful design.
Okay. Yeah, I think you achieve it. The magazines are really, really beautiful. And please tell me, you have a lot of accomplishments, and did you have any setback and how you overcame that? Could you tell us some story of your
A setback?
Yeah, a difficult time in your career when you were, just
Well, I would say that I made a short diversion to Goldman Sachs after writing about Wall Street and covering it as a reporter. I went to work on Wall Street, and there I found that I really didn't like that profession, and I wanted to go back to journalism. But that movement of mine coincided with one of the occasional crashes in Wall Street and technology and in the economy, and so there weren't any openings. My old job was filled, and my old employer wasn't hiring anymore, and that was a temporary setback. But eventually, I found my way back. There were other brands that were hiring, and so I was able to land on my feet.
What do you think about journalism right now? Because is it the same as in Poland as in other states, especially United States right now? The people are really divided, and this is also the same with journalism. Sometimes journalists fight with each other because they're on the other side of the barricade. Do you think that journalism is in a crisis right now?
I think journalism's business models are in a crisis. We used to be able to delude ourselves into thinking that the reason our publications were successful is that we were such great writers. And this was a delusion that was particularly rife at the place I worked, which was Time Incorporated. At the time, the largest magazine publisher in the world, now a company that is out of business entirely. Yeah. And what we realized when the internet came was that, and content publication and distribution became available to anybody, was that what gave us our business strength was simply that we had printing presses and distribution, and we had a kind of monopoly. It was very hard to compete with a big company like Time Inc. before the internet. After the internet, that business model...
Yeah, we lost the distribution.
Yes, that business model is basically eroded. We don't have the distribution advantage. Anyone can be a publisher. And so in that respect, the flows of cash that used to come to us because of our monopoly power are no longer there. And the journalism is expensive. Sending reporters out to get a story and research a story is expensive. And so it's very hard to make that work profitably these days. And in the US, and Grzegorz, I don't know if it's the same in Poland, but in the US, many once very solid business titles or other magazine titles are now owned by rich individuals rather than companies, because there is a certain element of it being a certain element of a vanity press. So titles that are global in their fame, Time, Fortune, um, Fast Company and Inc. are all owned by individuals rather than the companies that once owned them.
Also, with the distribution, we lost the part of the advertisement budget. They went into the internet, and the internet companies on the other side took our job as a journalist, our product, and they sell them on the internet almost for free, getting paid by advertisers.
Yes, that is true. And another aspect that's very difficult for our business, but also for our democracies, is that readers are losing the ability to distinguish between professional, caring, rigorous journalism and things that are just thrown up on social media without respect to whether they're truthful or not. And as a result, we journalists are swept away sometimes by a tide of misinformation or incorrect information or malevolent information, and that's difficult for our business model, but it's also very difficult for.
Do you think that there should be some? Do you think that there should be some regulation in that area?
Yes, I do, and I think that in the U.S. after the experience at the Capitol building a week ago, many of those platforms realized that they had allowed people to go too far, and that the disinformation that was being brooded about was damaging, and it literally cost two people their lives. And it's not hard to distinguish between opinion and deliberate lies, and platforms should do a better job of flagging the latter or kicking perpetrators of the latter off their platforms.
We should be doing that earlier, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree.
Coming back to the printed press, do you think that the paper will survive? Because it was so many times people said paper will gone in 2 years, in 5 years, and still we have a still printed press.
Yes, there is still a magic to the printed word, and I know that one of the things that we do at Inc. and Fast Company, as you do, Grzegorz, at your publication, is create lists of winners, of companies and entrepreneurs and other business leaders that we admire. And those lists derive an awful lot of their value to the people who are the winners because they appear in print. You could just as easily do a list like that and put it up on the internet, but it wouldn't carry the same weight. So that's evidence to me that there remains this power of the printed press, and so I think it will remain. It will have to find a new home, sort of a new place in the value equation in people's minds, but I don't think it will disappear altogether.
Last question, because we have a question from our viewer, which is in this topic. What's your opinion on artificial intelligence in journalism? Because is there a place for human journalists or only for AI writing articles?
Well, I certainly hope that there remains a place for human writers. And I think we're many decades away from AI being at a place where it can, where the writing can happen with the nuance and understanding and deftness that talented humans can bring to it. I think that it's very difficult to consider the algorithms that would determine the particularly apt word choice. You're an editor, Grzegorz. You know how hard it is to do with, your human Carmen-based computer up here to find the right phraseology. Think how hard it would be to program that into a computer. There are, on the other hand, plenty of examples of routine types of reporting that can now be done by artificial intelligence. Stock reports and shares. stock market performance or sports scores or things like that, where the information is contained in a fairly limited range of parameters. But when it comes to conveying emotion and using persuasive powers and evocative language, all that stuff that is the wonder of really good journalism, I don't see how that can within decades be reproduced by AI.
Yeah, and I hope it will never happen, because I love to be a journalist. Thank you very much for your time, for your conversation. And we change topic right now, because you're gonna talk about entrepreneurs and the traits to be a successful. So, Eric, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. I will share my screen and give a little presentation about the traits of successful entrepreneurs based on what we've learned at Inc. and Fast Company. So bear with me while I share my screen. Now, can you see my screen being shared?
Yeah.
Yes, we can. Yes.
All right, then let me turn this to a slideshow. Okay, so my presentation is called Return on Character. So as Grzegorz said, I'm the CEO of Mansueto Ventures. Mansueto Ventures, in spite of the name, is not a venture capital firm. And sometimes I wish it was a venture capital firm, because if it were, I would be a lot more popular at the startup conferences that I used to go to in the days before COVID. Instead, Mansueto Ventures is a holding company for two business titles that I love, which include these beautiful magazines. Here you see the winter issues of Inc. and Fast Company, the two magazines that I'm responsible for. On the left is Inc. with a cover subject of Michael Strahan. Inc. for 40 years has been devoted to just one purpose, which is helping entrepreneurs succeed. And on the right is Fast Company, which is its younger sibling, only a mere 26 years old, with Serena Williams on the cover. Fast Company is edited for progressive business people who believe that the future of business will be built on 5 pillars: innovation, creativity, technology, social justice, and beautiful design. Now, before I was CEO, I was an editor, as you heard, as Grzegorz allowed me to run through my CV. I wrote and covered personal finance and Wall Street for titles like Fortune and Money, Business 2.0, Bartosz. I'm glad that was one of your favorite publications. I founded a website for CBS called CBS Money Watch. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I took a slight detour in my career. I had decided that it was time for me to stop writing about rich people and become one. So I went to work on Wall Street for Goldman Sachs. But I quickly learned that my heart was in journalism. So I came back and started to work at Inc. And then one day, my boss, the owner of Mansueto Ventures, Joe Mansueto, invited me to lunch at his favorite restaurant in Chicago called Beatrix. And this is a picture of the interior of Beatrix. And while we were eating our salads, Joe asked me to be his CEO. From this, I would derive 2 lessons. One is that I will forever have a fond spot in my heart for Beatrix Restaurant. And if you ever get to Chicago, it's on North Clark Street, just north of the Chicago River. Please go there. Tell them I sent you. And the other lesson is that is just a piece of advice, that if a billionaire ever invites you to lunch, go. Now, In the world of journalism, it's unusual for someone who is an editor to become also the top business person at a media company. That's usually, there's a pretty strict divide between what we call church and state in journalism. So a person like me who rose to business leadership from the editorial side is a bit unusual. And Joe's choosing me to be CEO is like, sort of like electing the Pope to be president. Now, if that metaphor doesn't resonate with you, think about how unusual it would be if everyone referred to Donald Trump as Your Holiness. But what I hope is that my sort of eccentric career journey gave me a different perspective and a useful perspective on the central question that we deal with at Inc. and Fast Company in every story we work on, which is this: how do successful entrepreneurs do it? As an editor, I was interested in telling stories around that question. As a business leader, I have a personal investment on getting the answer. It so happens, luckily, though, that at Inc. and Fast Company, I happen to work for two companies that are very well positioned to answer that question about how successful founders do it. In fact, you could say that I work with the best laboratories on earth for seeing what works in entrepreneurship. And those laboratories are two recognition programs: the Inc. 5000 and Fast Company's most innovative companies. Well, let's start with the Inc. 5000. Oh, the Inc. 5000 is Inc.'s most famous franchise. It ranks the fastest growing private companies that we're able to identify in America. Companies can get on the list by applying and telling us their revenues, which is usually a pretty closely held secret. We verify their revenues by looking at their tax returns or audited statements, and then we rank the fastest growing among the applicants. And when I say fast growing, I mean really fast growing. The number one company this year, a company called OneTrust, it's based in Atlanta, Georgia, grew more than 48,000% over the past 3 years. Once companies get on the Inc. 5000, they don't generally stop there. They continue to grow. And a lot of companies that are now household names around the world first rose into public consciousness on the Inc. 5000. So companies like Method, Chobani, Under Armour, Elon Musk's Solar City, and a few little tech companies by the name of Facebook and Microsoft and Oracle first made the scene as members of the Inc. 5000. The defining franchise for Fast Company is the world's 50 most innovative companies. The process there is a little different. The companies that apply have to tell us what innovation they're talking about and tell us why they think that innovation is particularly worthy of note. What did it do to improve their company or their industry or make the world a better place? And then those companies that are deemed to have made the best positive difference in the world are selected as winners. But like the Inc. 5000, the most innovative companies tend to be a list of the world's most admired companies. Adobe, Shopify, Peloton, Oatly, all of these companies were among this year's most innovative companies. So from all this ranking and data gathering and storytelling, what do we learn? Well, we learn that in a dynamic economy in which technology changes the game every couple of months, nothing is permanent. Everything changes. Every plan you make will be disrupted. To quote the Prussian military genius von Clausewitz, no business plan survives its first encounter with reality. And the only way to thrive in this ever-changing, constantly disrupted world is to build a culture that adapts. But remember, adaptability is not a strategy. You can't plan for something you can't anticipate, and you can be sure that you will encounter something that you didn't anticipate. So the only way to prepare is to have a culture that adapts, which is why we at Inc. and Fast Company think there's a lot of truth in this popular business school cliche that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that is such a kind of evocative and fun way to phrase it that I and everybody else I know wishes that was actually said by the great management thinker Peter Drucker, but it wasn't. Somebody else made that up. But there's another corollary to this culture eats strategy for breakfast, and it's this, which was either said by Winston Churchill or by me, probably me. A company's culture reflects the character of its leader. And what do I mean by that? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I'd like to answer the question by the way journalists always answer questions, by telling a story. Now, you remember that I started in journalism covering Wall Street. And when I came to Inc., I wasn't sure that I would really be at home. The people I was covering at Wall Street were very smart and very polished and excessively well-dressed. And that's not the way entrepreneurs generally are, not when they're starting up a company. So I wasn't sure I would really fit in. But all those doubts evaporated the day I encountered an entrepreneur in the pages of Inc. named Hill Davis. Now, Hill Davis had been a bond trader on Wall Street, but he left to start his own company, which sold bespoke men's clothing on the internet. The company was called J. Hilburn. Now, today, selling men's suits and shirts online, it doesn't sound like all that groundbreaking, but at the time it was fairly innovative. But for J. Hilburn, like for most entrepreneurial companies, things didn't go exactly according to plan. The material that his Chinese manufacturers used was such low quality that the shirts would fall apart after a couple of washings. There were Italian manufacturers who did make high quality materials, but they wouldn't return Davis's calls because, after all, who would want to talk to some no-name entrepreneur from Texas? At J. Hilburn, the returns from dissatisfied customers began to outpace sales, and you can imagine that's not a sustainable business model. And on the personal front, the risks of entrepreneurship really began to come home. A bank was threatening to foreclose on the mortgage on his house. His children's private school called up to say that his kids were going to have to be expelled if he didn't pay tuition. And at that moment of maximum stress, Wall Street called. They wanted him back. And they offered him a contract called a 3x3 contract, guaranteed employment for 3 years at $3 million salary. So Davis thought about his situation and he talked it over with his wife, and he called Wall Street back and said, no. And at that point, I realized that I had found my place in journalism, that I wanted to write about people like Hill Davis. They had guts. They were building companies from scratch and out of nothing, making things of value and making the world a better place for their employees, for their communities, for their vendors. They were not those privileged skimmers on Wall Street. They were the people whose courage and innovation and grit were making the free enterprise system work. Now, you'll be glad to hear that Davis overcame his material problems and he got funding and he kept the company going. And J. Hilburn is now a perfectly successful, profitable clothing company in Dallas, and Davis made a fine exit. And everything is okay with him and J. Hilburn. But you got to ask, What kind of person does that? What kind of person takes that level of risk just to see a business idea through? I wouldn't do that. And neither would the vast majority of business people. What is it that makes entrepreneurs different? I conclude from working at Inc. and Fast Company that what makes entrepreneurs different is something about their character. And this graphic, it's a little puzzling to look at it now, but this graphic captures what that is. Now, this graphic shows the results of a remarkable survey that we did at Inc. a couple of years ago, comparing Inc. 5,000 honorees and ordinary business people. We've repeated the survey in years since, and the results are always pretty much the same. Now, to get the results, our survey taker took surveys of ordinary business people and measured them and how they responded against traits that they hypothesized were useful to business people. So traits like ability to delegate or salesmanship or ability to build relationships, things like that. Then we asked them to give that same survey to the Inc. 5000 honorees and contrast the Inc. 5000 honorees with the ordinary business people. The results are stunning. So that yellow circle on the inside represents the scores for ordinary business people as they measure against those business-like traits. The blue represents how much the Inc. 5000 honorees measure against those traits. So you can see in most cases, the Inc. 5000 entrepreneurs, by definition, the most successful entrepreneurs we were able to identify, outscored ordinary business people by 4 or 5 times. And the characteristics where they most exceeded ordinary business people were 3: the ability to take risk, focus on the business, and determination. Or if you'll give me the editorial license to rephrase that, guts, focus, and grit. What you might call the holy trinity of entrepreneurial character. Let's look at some examples. For guts, I think we can all agree that Hill Davis qualifies as an example of guts in an entrepreneur. So let's move on quickly to focus. And for that, I'd like to propose Drew Greenblatt, who's the owner of an entrepreneurial company called Marlin Steel. He's shown here in this picture, standing between 2 coils of steel wire, which is the raw materials for what he manufactures. And this is what he started manufacturing. I don't know if you would recognize that. I didn't when I looked at it. It's a basket, or a couple of baskets for bagels that would be used in a bagel shop. I don't know if you're familiar with bagels. It's bread shaped in a ring and just kind of a simple comfort food sold out of shops in the East Coast of the US. Greenblatt bought Marlin Steel to make these bagel baskets because he thought it would be a low risk, simple, disruption proof business. After all, who even knew that bagel baskets were a thing, let alone wanted to break into that business and compete with Marlin Steel? As Greenblatt saw it at that time, his only job was to buy the raw materials for his baskets and be nice to his customers. What could possibly go wrong? Well, what went wrong is that Chinese manufacturers started to make bagel baskets and sell them for $6. Greenblatt had to pay $7 just for the raw materials for every basket, and he couldn't make a profit at all if he sold them for less than $12. So he could not compete. He was eventually going to be out of business. And then, out of the blue, an engineer from Boeing, the airplane manufacturer, called Marlin Steel and wanted baskets to be used for transporting parts in an airplane factory. Now, these baskets had to be way stronger than bagel baskets, and they had to be built to pretty fine tolerances, like 1/64 of an inch. And Greenblatt said, as he recalled, he came this close to saying, no, we don't do that. But instead he said, all right, we can make those for you, but it's going to cost you $24 a basket. And the engineer said, whatever, when can you deliver them? And with that, Greenblatt pivoted from selling commodity products to a price-sensitive audience to selling precision and speed to a price-insensitive audience. The transition wasn't easy and it wasn't smooth, it wasn't inexpensive, but after expensive trials and errors, this is what he makes now. So this is a staging basket for parts in a Fiat automotive factory. Because a robot has to pick the parts out of the basket, the parts have to be held in exactly the right place to a tolerance of 3/1000ths of an inch, or about 1,000th of a millimeter. Marlin won the business from a German manufacturer who'd said it would take 4 months to fill the order as Fiat wanted it. Marlin filled the order in 4 weeks. Because the company is so highly highly automated, the company can sell its goods for about 60% cheaper than the nearest Chinese competitor and get to market in about half the time. Now, why is Marlin Steel an example of focus? Well, because when what you're selling is precision and speed, focus has to be your middle name. The Marlin Steel employees joke that every product that goes out the door has to meet 3 specifications: the customer's specifications, the shipping specification, which by practice has to be 25% better than what the customer asked for, and Drew's specifications, which are stricter still. So now Drew Greenblatt, who was the schlumpy guy whose sole ambition in life was to make bagel baskets, is now the poster kid for high-tech US manufacturing. He's spoken in front of Congress, he's spoken before the president, not Trump, but the real president, the one who came before him. Oh, and one more note about Marlin Steel. Just as Hill Davis and Jay Hilburn were the companies that made me realize that I was in the right place at Inc., the story of Marlin Steel was what convinced my colleague Jill Bernstein to leave her job at Time Inc., writing about celebrities at Entertainment Weekly, and come to work for Fast Company. The third entrepreneurial trait is grit. And for that, I'd like to tell you the story of Rebel Athletic, a company founded by Karen Nosif Aldrich. Now, you may be familiar with a sport called competitive cheer. And if you're not, maybe you're familiar with the practice of cheerleading, which is happens at every sporting event in the US practically, where people line up on the cheerleaders, line up on the side of the playing field and dance and lead cheers. That's cheerleading. That's not competitive cheer. Competitive cheer is a team sport. It's very athletic. It's highly acrobatic, and it is murderously competitive. But it's not as competitive as the business of making the uniforms for competitive cheer teams, which is the business that Rebel Athletics is in. Now, Aldrich's idea was that by bringing fashion design and sophisticated outsourced manufacturing techniques to competitive cheer, she could make better uniforms cheaper than the incumbent. The incumbent was a company known as Varsity Brands, which was a billion-dollar conglomerate that owned 90% of the market. And at first, it looked like Aldrich was going to win her gamble. She quickly grew to $20 million in sales of these uniforms. She captured a growing market share, and she's getting really prominent clients like professional sports teams. But then the empire struck back. And the incumbent used its advantages. So the way things work in selling uniforms to competitive cheer teams is that all the uniforms are bought through the gyms that organize the teams. And the only showrooms for this merchandise are the venues where the competitions take place. And it so happened that most of the events where the competitive teams compete were owned by Varsity, the incumbent. The biggest independent event, the one that Varsity did not own, was called the NSA All-Star event. It was in Dallas, Texas. It was essentially the World Cup of competitive cheer. And it was the place where Rebel Athletics did most of its sales. And in a move that only a bully could really love, Varsity bought the NSA All-Star event 4 months before this World Cup of competitive cheer was going to happen. So Rebel Athletics no longer had a venue in which to sell and display its merchandise to its customers. And it couldn't even get its people into the events. It was essentially out of business. Except for Grit. So frozen out of the arena where this event was going to take place, Audrich resolved to put her showroom in a giant lorry and park it outside the arena. Now, you can't do this in Dallas. You can't park a giant truck or lorry outside an arena where a sporting event is taking place unless you're shooting a film. So picture this. On the day of the event, the girls and their parents are milling around outside the arena where the competition is going to take place. And up drives a giant lorry with Rebel merchandise in the back, in the trailer, and Karen Nosef Aldrich at the wheel with a movie permit in her hand. Park the truck, girls and their moms and coaches could come into the back, try on the Rebel uniforms, and while there, be interviewed for a documentary film being made by Rising Rebellion Film Productions. And one other important thing to note is what the subject was of the documentary film. It was how smart girls handle bullies. Now let's review. In a dynamic economy, everything changes. There are no exceptions. Your company cannot get a free pass, no matter how solid its marketplace advantage seems now. You will confront a challenge you hadn't anticipated, and it could be serious. This is not a problem with the free enterprise economy. It's how it's supposed to work. And all you can do to compete is to create a culture of entrepreneurship, to foster those qualities of guts, focus, and grit in your company. And doing that is the responsibility of you, the leader of the company. It's just Newton's first law. Without your intervention, your organization is just going to keep going in the direction it's going. You have to be the force that acts on it and affects change. And in that sense, the culture and your ability to change the culture into what it needs to be is a reflection of your character. The work of leading a company in this disruptive, ever-changing world is in you. If you want your company to embody the traits of entrepreneurship, you have to embody them in yourself. If you want your employees to have the guts to put it all on the line, you have to do it first. If you want a culture in which your employees feel free to tell the truth to you and to each other, you have to have the guts to face the truth. And if you want to change the culture and make it the culture that is adaptive and that can survive in an ever-changing economy, you have to have the guts to enforce the behavior that will get that done. Culture arises from what you do, not what you say or the mottos you put up on your conference room wall. You have to focus on living the culture you want every day. You have to insist on excellence, but you have to resist the temptation that every entrepreneur has to do it themselves, to do it their way. You have to foster competence. And if you try to do it yourself, all you do is foster learned helplessness. Finally, remember that you can't do it yourself. That when you're a leader, it's not about your performance. It's about them. It's about the performance that you can get from your team. And finally, grit. John Paul DeJoria, the founder of Paul Mitchell and Patron Liquors, says that the single biggest reason that entrepreneurs fail is that they give up too soon. Face it, that as an entrepreneur, you will fail and you will have to get back up and get back into the fight. You cannot fold in the face of failure. I don't know if scrappy is a word or has a comparable word in Polish, but it's how you characterize a little dog that faces off against a big dog. When you're a startup, you're the little dog. And there are plenty of big dogs out there and you can't back down. When you're starting up a company or you're in any kind of leadership position, as the founder of Ford and Boeing, Alan Mulally, put it to me, you don't own your own expression. You have to put on a brave face no matter how you feel. If your team loses a football match and you come into the office and you look glum, your employees are not going to say, oh, the football team must have lost last night. No, they're going to say, we're just 2 weeks away from bankruptcy. You have to remember that you don't own your own impression, your own expression. And then finally, this saying from Winston Churchill, this really is from Winston Churchill, is that you simply never, 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 never can give up. In other words, if you want your company to have the character of a successful entrepreneur, you have to model that character yourself. I love this quote from David Brooks, the New York Times columnist, who wrote a book called The Road to Character. His book is full of stories of semi-famous people who he considers to be people of character. And all of them had one kind of arc to their lives, that they ended up doing something that was not what they set out to do. And yet they rose to the occasion. They rose to excellence, not in what they wanted from their life, but from what life called them to do. And if you're an entrepreneur, you are very familiar with this. You may have started your company because you were a great salesperson. You were a great visionary. You were a great tech leader. But you realize pretty quickly that that's not the job. The job is to get people around you and motivate them to do what needs to be done. The company's success depends not on how well you sell or how well you code or how well you envision the future, but on your ability to communicate to your team the entrepreneurial traits that will make your company successful. And this saying from Peter Drucker encapsulates it all. And this really is from Peter Drucker, is that whenever you see a successful company, you know someone made a brave decision. So that's what Peter Drucker says. And we saw a few minutes ago what the data says. And what the data says is that fortune favors the brave. And fortune favors the focused and those with true grit. There's a reason that venture capitalists all say that they invest not in the company, but in the person. What they say they're looking for is return on investment. But what they're really betting on, and what your employees are betting on, and your family, and your community, is something different. They're betting on return on character. Thank you. That is the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and come back to the grid.
Wow, Eric, thank you very much. Great presentation, great stories. It was such nice to hear that. Thank you very much. And we have some questions, and I have some questions, of course. And some of them are more general, some are more specific. And I ask you some more general for the beginning.
Sure.
Do you think that you can learn those traits that, or they are innate, that you can't do this, you were just born with that traits, and you are more risk taker, you have more risks inside of you, or you can learn during the years, during the growing up. And the question which is in this area, what is the main competences necessary to develop by kids in the primary schools to achieve success in the modern world's challenges? It's similar. You can learn those traits or not.
That is a great question, and I'm not dodging it. I'm reaching down to get my plug so my laptop doesn't run out of batteries. I'll be back in half a second.
Okay.
The question of whether entrepreneurs are born or made is one that we've talked about a lot at Inc. And there are people on both sides of the issue. I think that entrepreneurship is something you are born with. Mm-hmm. The urge to start something fresh, the willingness to take that kind of risk, the incredible focus that's required, and the resilience that's required are things that are hard to teach. And some evidence I have of that. Well, one thing that we've learned is that the best way to predict whether someone is going to be an entrepreneur or not is whether their parents were entrepreneurs. And that may be something about inherited traits. It may be something about sort of growing up in a world in which entrepreneurship is kind of just what is. But I think that those traits are very hard to impart. But do I also think that you can be better prepared to be an entrepreneur by education that prepares you for it? Yes, I do. And I think that one of the things that's really important to impart to people who want to embark on an entrepreneurial path is to get them to understand how difficult it is. And I would say that some members of our profession, Grzegorz, do not do a good job of that. There's a lot of glorification of entrepreneurs, and you have to realize that 99% of the time, all you read about are the success stories. You never see the failures, and even on the success stories, you never see the anguish and those near-death moments like Hill Davis encountered at J. Hilburn. That is one thing that you can prepare for, and just steel yourself for a bumpy ride, because entrepreneurship inevitably has its bumpy moments.
Mm-hmm. Another question is from Małgorzata. You mentioned about grit and where is the limit? Where is the border? Taking the business risk involving the own family future.
That is also a very good question. And I've had people come up to me after I tell them the story of Hill Davis and say, Hill Davis was incredibly irresponsible, and he never should have taken that risk with his family's finances. And I would agree that that would have been very reckless if he didn't have his wife's agreement to do it. So entrepreneurship, even if you don't go into business with your spouse, as some people do, is a family affair. And being the spouse of an entrepreneur is its own kind of ordeal, and your spouse needs to be prepared for it.
Mm-hmm. A question from me. Do those traits change over the times when the economic condition has changed? When there is a crisis, you should be more focused on grit or taking another risk, or should you just came back and use your other strengths? How do entrepreneurs see that?
I think that every young company is in its own kind of perpetual state of crisis, and you don't have the financial resources. You can't command a credit line necessarily, even if you have venture capital money, as few startups do. You would not get that impression from reading the press, but actually few startups do. You are burning through that cash, and that creates its own kind of high level of pressure. So what I would say is that the calculation changes as you grow, not so much with the cycles of the economy, but as you grow. And the decisions that you make affect an increasingly larger circle of people. When your company grows from, your 5 startup cronies to 50 people to 200 people, and you realize that you're no longer, playing this risky game with people who are in it for the risk with you, but you've brought on many people with families and who need stability, and you have now become responsible for 200 souls. That does change the calculus, and I think it makes any responsible human being want to dial back on the risk taking. But even at that level, you have to be able to make courageous decisions in how you lead, the direction you take your company, or you will be caught flat-footed by a dynamic economy for sure.
Yes, I totally agree. I've heard the story a few days ago of interview with the CEO of Spotify, and he was saying, when we were starting as a startup, there was 5 or 10 people. You were making everything, and right now I'm a leader, and the best what I can get to give people is to communicate my decision well and be responsible for them. So it's a different nature of tasks. Another question from Małgorzata. In which year was the survey conducted? Do you plan to do it again, taking into account what happened last year to the whole business world due to COVID?
The first survey was in 2016. The survey was repeated in 2019 with pretty much the same results. I'd like to take the survey again, have us take the survey again in a year or two. I don't anticipate that it would change, but I would like the confirmation that these are still the cardinal traits of entrepreneurs. Last year was a very difficult year for many small businesses in the US and around the world. And it called on different styles of leadership. And it was very important that you needed to show your support for the people on your team because they were bearing enormous amounts of stress. And that called for a style of empathetic leadership that you didn't necessarily need to show in years past, but it really, this last year called for reserves of that. But I don't think that because the survey was taken from winners of the Inc. 5000 whose performance occurred over a period of 3 years, that you would need to take it just to see what the effect of 2020 would be. The survey is based on first identifying those highly successful entrepreneurs, that by definition the fastest growing companies in the US, and then comparing them to ordinary people.
One of the two last questions about most important trait, most important condition, human factor, competence, potential for startup company success. What do you think is most important?
Most important. What's the selection there again?
What would you say is the most important condition, human factor, competence, potential for startup company success? So I understand that which trait is most important for success or company.
I see. I observed that in the data that we took, the trait by which Inc. 5000 entrepreneurs exceeded ordinary business people by the widest margin was willingness to take risk. And certainly that is the table stakes for starting a company from scratch and not taking a safer path in your career. But that alone is not enough, and you need a constellation of other things. reckless courage is not going to help you get through those moments in which it looks like all is lost. Then you will need grit and resilience. And simply to be comfortable with risk and willing to get up after you're knocked down is not going to make your company successful unless you're willing to focus on what really are the business conditions and the realities of your business, the special sauce that your company brings to its market that will make it succeed. And so that may be a way to weasel out of picking one of those three. I think it's a constellation, and of course, those are not the only three, but those are the three most distinctive.
Okay, last one question from me. Eric, what was most important for you? What kind of trait in your career was most important to you? It was risk-taking when you switched the job from the banking Wall Street industry to the journalism, or something else?
I would say that in my own career and in that of many people who, maybe even most people, was resilience, so grit. But remember, I'm not an entrepreneur. I write about them, and I try to give them encouragement and help and advice and recognition. But I'm not an entrepreneur. I've never taken that kind of fundamental risk that someone takes to put it all on the line to start a company on the basis of an idea. So yes, I had some setbacks in my life, and so it was helpful to bounce back from those. And but I don't know that example from my own life is the one that would be the model for successful entrepreneurs.
Eric, thank you very much. I also think grit is a very important, having the ability to overcome these challenges and push on. That is a very good trait. Thank you very much for your lecture. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for agreeing to be with us. And
thanks for having me. This was very fun. I really appreciate it.
And I'm giving the floor to Bartosz, who's gonna introduce to our next webinars.
Okay, thank you very much, Eric. Thank you, Grzegorz. And I would like to ask our special and every week guest, Claudia, could you show us, because it's a present for you, Eric and Grzegorz. Claudia is our special guest who is drawing your thoughts. So she's graphic recorder. Please see what she does.
That's beautiful.
Claudia. Okay. Claudia,
here's what I did. So Eric, I'm happy to have a chance to talk to speak to you. That was wonderful listening to you, and these are really not just words that I always say. I mean, sometimes it's bigger pleasure, sometimes it's smaller. Today I had this dilemma of really I just wanted to listen to you and do nothing, because how you speak and how you present was absolutely amazing. So it was actually hard for me to to keep focus on listening and drawing both at the same time. So thank you very much. That's what I caught during today's presentation. The let's say this left part that you see here, let me do some modifications. Here, this part it's let's say a little bit of introduction, a part about maybe journalism, and so here is a little bit of part about you and your story. And as you can see, the let's say the main meat, as I say, is here. It's about guts, focus, and grit. I'm really inspired with that. I want to think about myself, that I have enough guts and focus and grit, and I stay with this thought forever. So once again, thank you.
Claudia, that's wonderful. God, you captured it so well. That is amazing. you were doing it in real time. That's so
Yes.
Yeah. And
You are very welcome.
As I remember, Claudia is vegetarian, so to say meat is not easy for her.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Not anymore. Not anymore. My partner is cooking meat so amazingly. It's really hard to, not eat meat. So
Okay.
not so true anymore.
My children are vegans, so I have to be vegetarian.
Oh, right. Yeah,
To be honest,
Got
it's hard to cook for everyone different dishes. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
Eric, thank you very much. I would like to share my short presentation about our great next guests. It was really pleasure to hear you, to have you at WEinnovators.Club, and be sure we will read your magazines all the time. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's see who will be next. Paweł, może ty przedstawisz naszych kolejnych gości, ja zrobię prezentację tylko. Jesteś zmutowany.
Next Wednesday, we will match with Anna Topol, CTO at IBM Research, and who will tell us about how IBM cooperates with science. It will certainly be an inspiring meeting for our entrepreneurs and scientists. So, yeah,
you can see that the link is bit.ly WEinnovators 33. Next meeting. Paweł? Are you alive? Okay, so I will say, Sally Helgason, she's great author, speaker, and leadership coach. I know that she wrote now the book, which is one of the best book in 2020, business book. You can meet her in 2 weeks at link bit.ly WEinnovators 34. And next person, Paweł? Paweł is our curator, so I'm waiting for for his words. He's the best for having our short introduction.
I have a bad connection with. I don't.
Here. Okay, so I will say for him. Oh, sorry. Sorry. So you can see our next guest, Carlos Grau, CEO at the biggest, I don't know of if world, but at Europe conference, Mobile World Capital, Barcelona. He will be at February 10th. It's great because it's my birthday day, so I hope we will meet here and we will can drink a wine for my health. So I would like to once more to thank our great partners. So my company. The first I would like to thank, and Grzegorz, thank you very much for
My
great
pleasure.
moderating. Our company, Industrial Development Agency, which is the producer of this series. I would like to ask American Chamber of Commerce, our great friends from USA, Instytut Nauk Ekonomicznych Polskiej Akademii Nauk. Dziękujemy bardzo, że jesteśmy z nami i że jesteście z nami. Koalicja na rzecz polskich innowacji. And of course, we would like to thank our project Open Innovation Network. So please follow our social medias, find us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And what I swear at the beginning, I will show you our film once again, and I hope it will be okay. So thank you very much for being with us. I hope that we will meet next time. So see you and be with us next week. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Grzegorz. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Paweł. See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
It's not as fast as in TV, but I really like to be in time, just in time. Okay, here we have it, and I hope it will be okay. Oh no, we don't have a. Sorry. Okay. Dziękujemy i do zobaczenia. Hej.